Board of Trustees of the Lamar Consolidated Independent School District is called to order at 6:30 p.m. This is the regular monthly board meeting being held on June 20th, 2023. We have a quorum with all members present. Please join me in a moment of silence to observe as you feel appropriate. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance and the pledge to the Texas flag, led by Isabella Pedraza from Wright Junior High School.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Dr. Nivens, are there any recognitions or awards?
No, ma'am, we don't have any.
Okay. Dr. Nivens, are there any introductions?
No, ma'am, we don't have any.
Okay. We will now have board member reports. Trustees, please keep your comments and reports to 1 to 2 minutes if you can. We'll start over here. You have anything?
That one? Okay, well, a lot has happened since the last one. I attended most of the graduations. I think I went to 5 out of 6, and it was very awesome to just stand up there and shake hands and watch those kids' smiling faces. They were so excited. I also attended the Confuncation, which was awesome, and kudos to everyone who put that on because it was really fun. And I also just recently came back from SLI, which was the Southern Leadership Institute. A couple other board members and I all went and just, learning, conference, getting credit hours. It was a good time. That's it.
A lot like Jackie's, graduations was awesome. It was great to see our students, just the joy they have on their faces, and then also SLI and Convocation as well, so.
Well, we're redundant. All the graduations, and yes, Convocation, and I do want to thank all those that came together to make that so special for our teachers and staff, especially the vendors and the outside resources that stepped up so that we could really show everyone such a good time, and they looked like they were turning into children right before our very eyes. It was exciting to see. And yes, we just got back from San Antonio, and we had a really good time and very good workshop sessions. And the only other thing I was going to report about, because it's exciting for me, that I got invited back to Austin Elementary. Always has the seniors come back for a day after they graduate, and we celebrate them. And it was so much fun to see all these kids that had gone through the school, and so many of them came back, and so many of them are going off to amazing universities, colleges, military service. And so something that we can be proud of, that we're sending these kids on their way and doing such a good job doing it. So thank you to everyone involved.
I have been in summer mode since the last meeting, so I've only done 2 things, and one is I attended the Lamar High School graduation ceremony, and I went to a safety and security meeting yesterday. That's it.
Okay, let's see. Dr. Nivens, is there a superintendent report?
Yes, Madam President, really briefly, a couple of trustees talked about Confuncation. It's our very first time doing an end-of-the-year celebration with all staff. And I just want to say a special thank you to Ms. Cole Hamilton and the communications team for organizing that, especially Dr. Kenesha Waits and Melissa Toon and some other folks, and I shouldn't say names, so I'm gonna forget somebody, but they did a phenomenal job, our very first time doing that. And I see there are some folks in the audience that sponsored that for us. And so I really appreciate the partnership that we have with our vendors and community leaders. A special shout out to Don McCoy at Fulshire Chamber of Commerce, because I think we had about 70 vendors there, and he secured most of those for us. And so again, the relationships are powerful. And so that's our first annual doing that. And a lot of staff came to me and said, we're doing it again next year, right? And it was like just a big field day for adults. And so we had a great time. And so again, I appreciate the team for putting that together and for taking time to do it.
Great, yeah, I think everybody had a really good time. Ms. Johnson, are there any public comments? Okay, at this time, we'll take action on the consent agenda. Are there any items that the board would like to pull? You want to pull some? What would you like to pull?
Yeah, I would like to ask the trustees to pull item 8I. It is a resolution that we have with one of our current partners. The resolution doesn't read as clear as we would like, and so we're going to ask the board to approve that, to pull that and not approve it tonight. We'll send it back to the attorney so we can get a different version of that reads a little bit more clear before I ask you to move forward with that. So I ask you to pull 8I and not take action on that tonight.
Okay. So everything's good except 8I. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the current consent agenda with the exception of item 8I?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I'd like to discuss something on item D. Do I just tell you what I want? Okay, okay. So it talks about the district's municipal advisor, and I was just wondering who that is, how they're chosen, and how are they paid? Are they paid a commission, or is it a fee, or how does that work?
Our municipal advisors and many of our team that helps us sell bonds are paid through
cost of issuance
Okay,
when we sell the bonds.
okay. Who is a municipal advisor?
It's Post Oak Municipal Advisor, it's Terrell Palmer, he's
Okay.
actually in the audience.
Okay. Okay, and how do y'all choose the advisor?
Typically, we use the same type process, whether it's underwriters, bond counsel, municipal advisors. We do a request for qualifications process, which they submit proposals, and then we evaluate and rank the ones that have the greatest number of qualities that we're looking for.
Okay,
Experience, things like that.
okay. Thank you. Is it
And
for me?
our bond attorney is in the room also.
Yes.
Jonathan, would you stand up, please? So he's the one to make sure that when we go out and sell bonds or go out for a bond, that everything is appropriate.
Yes, the order that's on your agenda comes from Jonathan's office.
Is there any other questions? No other discussion?
I do, I have another
Oh,
discussion.
yes, ma'am.
So I wanted to discuss item H, the approval with the Behavioral Treatment and Training Center. On page 68, so it talks about our relationship with the BTTC and Texana campus. And then in section 3, it talks about the responsibilities of the district, so what our responsibilities. And then in item D, it just talks about how, I did discuss this with Dr. Nivens. It says we utilize a variety of instructional settings to meet student needs, including district classes off the BTTC campus. So I just asked what for clarification of what that was. And do you want to talk about that here, or do you want me to just?
No, that's fine. Ms. Mathis is here to discuss that for us, so yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So your question in specifically is,
Yeah, so my question is, it says, we'll make available 6-hour instructional day in the least restrictive environment with any variation determined by the art committee. And then it talks about moving students off the BTTC campus. So I'm assuming that means that there's a possibility that they could be at LCISD campuses.
Not necessarily. For students who require general education or access to non-disabled peers, they would go back to their home school districts. That would mean that they no longer require the services of BTTC because it's a behavior treatment center. We provide the academics to students. And so we would have to basically recommend that they attend a Lamar CISD school in an ARD meeting.
Okay,
so
but,
let's back up a little bit. So the students at BTTC are all Lamar CISD students? They are not Lamar CISD? Where do they come from to get there first?
So they're parentally placed at BTTC, and so they can come from school districts all over the state. And so we have the obligation to provide academic instruction to them. We do so at the facility. And so they provide the behavior support at the facility. If a student is ready to go into a public school, then they would be recommended to return to their home zone school district.
okay, so there would not be students that are being treated by BTTC that could possibly be at our school campuses?
Not unless they are a Lamar CISD zone student.
Okay, but so if they reside in the LCISD district, then that's possible that they could still be living at BTTC, but attending LCISD campuses?
That would not be a recommendation that we would make because we would not be able to support them behaviorally within our school system.
Okay. Okay, so then what does that statement mean, I guess? They utilize a variety of instructional settings to meet student needs, including district classes off campus. Why, I guess my question is, why is it addressed if it's not a possibility?
Because we are legally required to offer a continuum of services to students. So we can't say we can only provide one setting. We have to be able to consider all settings. The location of those services is also determined by the ARD committee.
So it is a possibility that they could be in the LCISD campus?
I would say no to that because we are the ones who recommend the programming in the ARD committee meeting.
Okay.
Let me see if I can clear that up. So if a student is living at the facility, they are a student at the facility, right?
Right.
And we have staff over there to provide academic services.
Correct.
Is there an opportunity for the student to be ARDed out of BTTC, where they're no longer living at the facility, now they move back home to their general residence in Lamar CISD and come back to the Lamar CISD campus?
If they're at home, then yes, there is a possibility. But
Okay.
then the ARD committee still will consider, is this the most appropriate place for that student? Is this the least restrictive environment? That could still mean that we say the student needs to be in an out-of-district placement based on whatever those behaviors are.
Okay, my concern was just that they be residing at the Texana campus and attending our school district.
Right.
So you're saying that is not a possibility?
We would not ARD
No.
that.
Okay,
That wouldn't be our recommendation.
okay. It makes it sound like it's not probable, but it's possible. You see what I'm saying?
Well,
By the
because-
wording.
Correct, because we do have to consider all programming options.
Right,
But we do that for every student, just so you know that.
okay,
Yes,
okay.
okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Okay, let's see, and now I will call for the vote. All in favor of approving the current consent agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Let's see, we didn't have any pulled. Okay, and at this time, we will take action on the action items.
All right, trustees, we have our first action item. We have consider approval for selected 2023, 2024 Lamar CISD budget items. So Ms. Lowe is coming to the podium.
Good evening, Board of Trustees and Dr. Nivens. This evening, I have quite a list of 23, 24 budget items to discuss with you all. The first being the required budgetary action that will be taken by the Board of Trustees before September 1st. We'll also review previous action regarding our compensation plan for next year. Also look at current proposed action that administration is recommending to the Board of Trustees for this meeting, 23-24 budget updates, as well as legislative information and updates. And then I'll cover a couple of truth and taxation items that will also require future action, and that will be at the August 1st meeting. First of all, the budgetary action that's required by the board is that the trustees approve or officially adopt 3 different budgets. First being the general fund budget, and that's the local budget. The major revenue sources are local property taxes and state aid. The child nutrition fund, which is the school lunch program. So the major revenues there are from meal sales and federal program revenue. And then finally, the third is the debt service fund, also known as the interest and sinking fund. And the major revenues in that fund are from local property taxes, interest earnings, and a small amount of state aid. Starting with the general fund, as we've mentioned in a couple previous meetings, there are some underlying assumptions that we use when building the budget. First of all, we're using the 22-23 or current year staffing guidelines unless noted otherwise. We've modeled hiring 140 additional teachers, possibly more, to accommodate the growth in enrollment in the district. We've also added substitute pay increases, and they're included in the projection. Pay grade table adjustments for instructional paraprofessionals, central services staff additions, which will support campuses, and then also 18 police officers and the equipment, vehicles, and things to further our one-to-one campus initiative, and also that we would like to post and hire those officers prior to the start of the school year. In addition, we've added costs for opening new schools, which is mainly made up of staffing costs, but there are other operating costs as well. We've included raises for all staff in the projection. We have an average of a 3% raise in all staffing categories, a flat raise for those paid according to the teacher hiring schedule, and then a percentage of midpoint considered for all other positions. The estimated cost for a 3% raise is about $8.2 million. The teacher salary schedule raise portion of that is about $5.8 million, and then the pay grade tables is about $2.4 million. Next, I'd like to review the action that was taken last month on selected Lamar CISD compensation plan items. The 18 police officers and the equipment totaled about $1.8 million. Compensation increases for all staff, about $8.2 million. Rate increases for substitutes and instructional paraprofessionals of about $1.5 million. And then special education stipend program adjustments, which is not an increase to the budget, but more of a reallocation of current stipends and payments in the special ed department program budget. The estimated cost of all those items is $11.464 million. The current item that we're recommending tonight is the addition of staffing units that are included in the projection. First being instructional and administrative support staffing, which was a priority that was addressed by the board budget committee. We're also requesting that we are able to post and make those offers for staff prior to the start of the fiscal year. The specific recommendations are to add 140 teaching units or more if necessary to accommodate enrollment growth. That's the biggest item at $11.7 million. Staffing for new campuses, and you'll see the new campus names there, $1.8 million. And then other campus-based staff, including security officers, ISS aides, and some administrators at about $648,000. And then central services staff in support of campus needs of about $2.4 million. The total of those items is $16.543 million. Next, I'd like to go through a quick review of where we stand with the 2023-24 budget, and this is as of last month's May 16th board meeting. I'd like to specify revenues first. As you'll see in the chart there, we have $437.7 million in revenues. 53% roughly from local sources, the biggest one being property taxes, the current year levy and delinquent taxes of about $227 million out of the $230.963 million. 46.5% of the local revenues are from state aid, about $203.3 million, with the biggest being the $165.6 million in foundation school program entitlements. Then we have a little less than 1% of the local revenues coming from federal sources of about $3.4 million, the greatest being the Medicaid programs of SHARS and MAC. I'd like to talk a little bit about our property value estimates. We have received one estimate so far of preliminary values from the Central Appraisal District. Taxable value that we're using in the projections right now is $25.4 billion. That's almost an 11% increase over last year's values at certification, which would have been the end of July in 2022. The tax rate we're using is roughly 80 cents. That would be a maximum compressed rate of about 75 cents plus the 5 additional pennies that the board adopted. I'll talk more about the MCR later in the presentation. You add to that frozen taxes of about $23 million, and that's the portion that goes to the general fund, and a 99% collection rate will give us the budget for the current year levy of $224.384 million. We add to that delinquent tax estimates of $1.6 million, and that gives us our about $226 million of tax revenue. On the expenditure side of the budget, we're looking at a total of $437.426 million, with the bulk of that typically being over 85% going to payroll costs and benefits. And here we're at $369.1 million roughly in that category. The 6200s are contracted services. That includes professionals that we hire, but also a big portion of that are our utilities. So looking at revenues versus expenditures, we are a little bit ahead at this point in time at $283,000 of revenue exceeding the expenditure budget. Moving on to the legislative piece. In 23-24, we will be impacted by House Bill 3 action that occurred in 2019. In that bill, there were certain elements for the equalization of wealth amongst all the districts in the state. And the piece I'd like to talk about is the guaranteed yield or the golden penny yield. HB 3 provided a driver that would increase that amount if the other parameters of the calculation warranted. So the guaranteed yield is the greater of the 96th percentile of wealth statewide or 160% of the basic allotment. In 23, that amount was 98.56, and it applies to the first 8 pennies above the maximum compressed rate. We've accessed 5 cents of that. The state anticipates that we will exceed, or the state actually will exceed the guaranteed yield rates of growth this year. And so the driver that I spoke about is going to increase the guaranteed yield rate to $126.21, which is about a $28 increase in the rate for next year. So all that being said, when you work that through the formula, you end up with about $8.5 million additional funds.
So to be clear, G, if you go back to that last bullet, you know, we talk a lot in Lamar about will and shall, may and shall, right? So we're saying additional revenue will be added, shall be added, may be added? So I just want to be clear for everyone that's listening.
This will be because the driver is in state law, but it only actually happens if the values in the state and other conditions are satisfied or met. So this did kick in. The district is very intentional and conservative when we look at our revenues, and we don't try to overpredict or overestimate the money that we think we're going to have. Because if you do something like that, then you end up over budgeting. And then if it doesn't happen, then you're really in a bad way. So we were very conservative and just used current law. But now that the session's over, we know that the rate's going to increase, so now we've got a little bit of breathing room.
So the reason why I ask is because, board members, we're opening 2 campuses this year. We have 4 more next year, 4 more after that. And so when we start the budgeting process, we're going to ask the trustees to consider earmarking and designating some of that fund balance, because, it costs us about between $3.5 and $4 million to open a campus. And so if you have to open so many at one time, that money has to come from somewhere. And so we're going to ask the trustees to consider earmarking some of that money. So as we start to open campuses, we don't take a $12 million, $15 million hit all at once, that we start saving for that. Because the students are here, and the facilities, the community gave us permission to move forward with some of the facilities. So, as we're buying land and building it, we want to make sure that we can staff them. And so we're going to ask for some of that money to be earmarked.
All right. So, into the weeds one more time, right quick. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk about tax rate compression. So property tax relief, and you're going to be hearing this a lot probably the next few months too with the special sessions. The state can provide property tax relief to taxpayers simply by decreasing the M&O rate, and they do that through tax rate compression. There's a mandated formula that results in a tax rate that's called the maximum compressed rate. And it's TEA approved, and the mechanics of it are that if the district's values, property values grow faster than the state's values, then we're going to be compressed more than other districts. And the more we grow or faster we grow, the more compressed we get. So the MCR is going to fall within a range that's set in law. So there's a floor and a ceiling. The legislature sets the ceiling, and then the floor is 90% of the ceiling. For 23-24 calculations, the range began at about 72 cents to 80 cents. And as I mentioned when I was talking about the property tax calculation, we're using 75 cents. So the 75 cents plus the 5 cents that the board also approved years ago gives us the 80 cents we're using in projections. And then the part that relates to this legislative session, it looks like the floor and ceiling will probably drop from the 72 to 80 cents to about 71 and a half cents instead of the 72 and a half cents. So there's going to be additional compression. The reason I bring that up is because our total, when you look at local revenues, you look at mainly property taxes and state aid. And so the total of those are paid for either locally by taxpayers or by the state. And when the tax rate is compressed, more of the funds we get are paid for by the state. It doesn't change the total by very much. It might change a little, but not materially. The taxpayers will pay less of the burden and the state will pay more.
Every year,